What's going on, guys? Andrew and Logan back here today from New Bark Network to do a podcast because it's been a couple weeks because we've done this because life happens, you know? How's it going, Logan?
We were fighting the robots from the Stadia announcement.
Yeah, all of them were coming to invade us via the streaming network and take our physical games away from us. We knew the apocalypse was coming.
The wasteland's not so bad, kids.
Not so far, at least. Anyway, in terms of game releases this week, I also want to cover one console that got released, but we'll get to that in a second. So we had our final NIS physical Vita games release, being the longest 5 minutes, which is like a classic 8-bit style RPG that's about like time loops and stuff and reliving the same 5 minutes to rewrite it or something along those lines. Then we had Penny Punching Princess and The Lost Child. Penny Punching Princess being this brawler thing with like coin collecting mechanics and such. And then The Lost Child, which is like apparently this sort of Pokemon-ish type of RPG where you collect these monsters and have them fight for you and whatnot. Then we had Final Fantasy VII come to the Xbone and the Switch. Legend of Heroes: The Trails of Cold Steel with its 4K remastered edition for the PlayStation 4. Speaking of which, that Steelbook, one of the greatest things I've ever seen. That was a release I picked up this week. We had Yoshi's Crafted World come out. We had Kingdom Hearts, the story so far, finally get its EU release, a little bit post-mortem if you ask me. Then Assassin's Creed 3 Remastered. And Mortal Kombat 2's beta is now live on the PlayStation 4 and Xbone. What are your thoughts on these releases, my friend?
I have Mortal Kombat 2 on the Genesis already. What?
Yeah, dude, why would I buy another one? 2 is less than 11, and it works like racing places. The lower the number, the better it is. So all you're missing is one, and you've got the greatest version of the game. But yeah, that's a game that's generated a lot of hype from people. I know that like Mortal Kombat's kind of seen a revival in its fan base over the past couple of years, so I'm sure there's some excitement behind that one.
Get the Genesis version, it has blood.
There you go. Hey, you know, if you get it on the Nintendo consoles, it's never going to be violent enough. As for the other games, dude, freaking why is Kingdom Hearts story so far coming out post Kingdom Hearts 3 in the EU? Like, what the frack? The point of that is to catch you up all on one system so you don't have to buy 11 things and all of their cousins in order to play the series.
You still do if you're a purist.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But they look good in 4K on a PlayStation 4 because Sony owns my soul. RIP, the Vita, yep. NIS was one of the best physical producers of games for that system, and they just
all those games you rattled off did sound really cool.
Yeah, they're all cool because Vita games, they're cool. They're good. Go get a Vita, even though it's dead. And if you go buy Vitas, it's going to make the prices higher for me. So don't go get a Vita, but go get a Vita. That's today's advertisement. In terms of the one console release I really wanted to touch on, actually, you know what? Let's talk about Final Fantasy VII for a second. It's finally seeing a port to a Nintendo system. That's kind of cool. On the Switch. And
just after I get my PS3 working to play it on that.
I mean, you can still play it on the PS3. It's fine. Just pop in the disc.
I'm still going to.
And you have the physical version. Physical's better, kids. Remember that. But yeah, we had the Analog Mega SG release this week. What is the Analog Mega SG? Some of you may be asking. Well, it's made by a company called Analog. Analog. They like to take things, you know, physical old consoles are not obsolete. They're fun. They're retro, not obsolete. Let me re-emphasize that. And they like to produce high-end versions of that run off official reproductions of the hardware of the systems, rather than using software emulation, such as something like the Hyperkin likes to do that a lot. What are some of the other ones? I know Sega's been in lieu with a lot of companies that have made like these sort of emulation-based reproduction things that can run off things. You have the Retron 5, that type of stuff. What distinguishes Analog is this is legit hardware. For example, the Analog Mega SG, which is their equivalent of a Sega Genesis, has native HDMI out, reads all Sega Genesis cartridges, reads all, like, other region Sega Genesis types of games, which names I'm blanking on at the moment. It comes with an adapter to play, I believe it was the Master System games, if I'm remembering correctly. And it can also be compatible with the Sega CD, because once more, this is hardware and that's cool.
What about the 32X?
Not compatible with that at the moment, because that had something to do with, like, using interlaced power supplies and such. So if you're a purist who really likes your 32X games or your 32X CD games, you still need a Genesis. But if you're a typical fan that's not bonkers like I am, well, you could always just get one of these. It's actually really cool, if you ask me. Having that native HDMI out is a big deal, especially because I know one thing you and I discuss a lot is how do you get the best picture quality out of these old systems? Because let's be honest.
Start.
I mean, yeah, but SCART's expensive and inconvenient and HDMI cables, they're nice.
I mean, aren't having all these consoles already expensive and inconvenient? Just, maximize that.
That's true. Otherwise, you're not doing it the right way. Regardless,
Uh-huh.
Analog seems to do a good job with these things. They're even behind remaking some like Bluetooth style controllers, and there's another type of receiver they have built into some of these systems. I'm sorry, some of the controllers as well that has even lower latency than the Bluetooth stuff. So it's pretty awesome if you ask me.
For the plebeian peasants
Who
it
don't own
seems
official
doable.
blast processing. Would this count as blast processing?
Exactly.
After all, it is a hardware clone. Like, does it have blast processing? I'm gonna post this in the.
We're gonna have to ask Sega about that. They're the ones who coined the term.
That's true. And that message in Sega forums: does the analog Mega SG have blast processing?
Does it carry over to this?
Yeah, does it carry over to the HD remaster, or was it lost in translation? But yeah, that's a cool console. I may look into one of those at some point. We'll see. In other news, if you're a Borderlands fan, this was your week to basically just explode with happiness. Why? Borderlands 3 has been announced. Borderlands Got Ya Edition has been announced for a 4K release on the PS4 and the Xbone. 4K updates are coming to the Handsome Jack collection, and all of that just sounds freaking awesome. Like, dude, that means on one system you can play all of your Borderlands games, including most likely the third one, which we actually don't have a release date for. But let's be real, if they're announcing it now, it's probably coming to the current gen systems.
Just when I get 3 of them for the PS3, they have to come out with this.
You gotta play it in 4K, my guy, and we will be on the PlayStation 4.
They got me.
They got you, hence the got ya edition thing. Speaking of which, if you're a physical buff like we are, make sure you go and get that like now, because it's physical edition exclusive release to GameStop, and most of them aren't taking pre-orders anymore. Comes out this Wednesday, so book it to your local GameStop, be there when it opens, get your physical release, and be a real gamer, not one of those I like to rent my games digital people. Anyway, being super critical this episode. We also have the fact that the Sega Genesis Mini was announced. So you got your SNES Mini, you got your PlayStation Classic, which is basically a paperweight, you got your NES Mini, and now you got the Sega Genesis Mini, which ironically came out or was announced within the same week as the Mega SG. But still...
Are we now going to have mini console wars? Are we going to have to cover this?
Dude! That would be so good. If Nintendo's like, dude, you're doing that? We're re-releasing the SNES Mini. It's gonna be amazing. It's gonna be absolutely amazing. I don't know. It's cool.
It'll get all the people who are still SNES versus Genesis out of the woodwork. They'll come back.
Dude, I can't wait to go to my local game store, my local Target, my local online forum, and watch people scream at each other like it's 20 years ago. That's what I live for. That's what I pay for popcorn buckets for. This is the fuel that burns beneath my fire. I want you to understand this. The console wars...
I already do understand this.
Yeah, the console wars...
We do.
...are alive and rolling. War is good for the economy, my friend, unfortunately. And that could be true for the game economy as well. Now, as for
much is.
Yeah, basically. Let's talk a little bit about this Borderlands thing for a second. Did you watch the Borderlands 3 trailer?
No.
Excellent. I did, and it looks really good. They put a lot of emphasis on the fact that you're going to have massive amounts of weapons. You're going to have weapons that can walk around themselves. We had some significant appearances from older characters, which almost makes me wonder if the ones that are still alive are going to be playable in some capacity. Because, like, dude, they showed a lot of Lilith in this trailer. Like, a lot of Lilith in this trailer. Brick also made an appearance from OG Borderlands. We had a lot of guns flying around. I mean, it's Borderlands. What else do you expect? They seem to emphasize this idea of a lot of Vault Hunters, the possibility of a lot of different worlds. Overall, it looks really good. The one thing I've always given Borderlands games props for is I feel like they've done a good job of maintaining co-op games being relevant in the modern age, which is not something that's done super often anymore, and they're compatible with couch co-op.
Very true.
So props to them on that. Moving right along here, some more PlayStation 5 potential backwards compatible patents have emerged into the air, which kind of brings us into our central topic of today, so we'll dive into that some while we're discussing it, which is your Microsoft, your Sony, and your Nintendo. Google Stadia just gets announced, blows the world of gaming open, like wide open, What do you do?
What do you do?
Yeah, yeah. What are you gonna do now, boys? You're dealing with 60 FPS 4K streaming services with 10.6 teraflops coming right in your face. So let's dive into this a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about what strategies we would take if we were these game companies, because obviously we're big business owners. What kind of strategies they
Hmm.
seem to be taking behind the scenes based off the rumors that have surfaced. Which of these companies are best suited to compete with Google, and what problems Google may have themselves that haven't been super touched on yet. So let's go ahead and start with that one for a second here, because I know you and I were super excited at Stadia's announcement for the possibilities that this
Hmm.
kind of opens, right? Despite being physical buffs. Now, one thing that wasn't really touched on a whole lot, at least not directly, was that most of us through our internet service providers have a theoretical limit on our, like, a data cap on the amount of stuff that we can get through our Wi-Fi each month. Now, the thing is, for your average internet user, you're never getting anywhere near this, just running your Netflix, doing your internet searches, playing your onlines with your games and your such, and doing some email looking ups and whatnots and your YouTubes. You know the deal. But game streaming takes dramatically more data than that, because basically you're sending the entire game via file to your system via streaming. So this is basically talking about a 2-hour movie versus 2 hours of gameplay. You're talking like 8 to 15 gigabytes of data depending on the quality, to like 80 gigs of data all at once, which is just absolutely massive. So the possibility of these capping off, especially from my computer science friends out there that I've talked with, is actually rather high and could be problematic for Google. What are your thoughts on this, Logan?
Hmm. Well, I haven't actually looked into this part of Stadia too much, but yeah, from what I understand, that could be a concern if you're one of the people who wants to embrace Stadia in the future. You would have to make sure that your particular ISP has policies that essentially just dictate this as okay.
Yeah, that's what the Google Stadia CEO has actually stated, is he's hoping, and this is the keyword I kind of want to emphasize here, because essentially that means Google is extending the control of the service to being dependent upon other companies basically rolling with it. They're hoping
Mm.
that internet service providers will raise or eliminate the cap on these ISPs. The problem is, once more, that's leaving some of the success of Stadia in the control of other companies, even more than it already is, which if I was Google, I'd be a little more concerned about that myself, especially unless they're going to get into the internet service provision games themselves, at which rate then they may have more influence over it. Pardon me.
They may actually do that. We know how these companies are. And they've already done something similar like this. The first thing that comes to my mind is Google Fi they had a while ago, which was sort of like their own sort of cell phone provider thing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's always possible. I know a lot of companies were trying to get into the cell phone service, so I think internet service may sort of be the next thing on the horizon for that. At which rate, if game streaming really does start to take off, I think it's possible we could see some competition amongst companies to kind of offer the best ISPs for gamers. But right now, I feel like this is kind of an awkward time for Stadia to launch, with that being a little bit of a genuine concern, because I don't think companies are going to catch on to that right away, especially if a lot of people are still willing to back Sony and Microsoft, which I think at least initially they will be, and their systems
Mhm.
aren't requiring these massive amounts of ISP because they're still running locally. So it's like you're not forcing these service providers to want to provide that. What's in it for them is kind of the big question, right?
So yeah, my thoughts are that they will pursue some sort of ISP game. They'll try and go after them because that whole industry is really ripe for some competition at this point. What we're seeing between the big ISPs is essentially just stagnancy. So it would be nice if Google did jump in there and show them some competition, maybe showed us some benefits. That would be nice.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have to wait and see on all of that, but that throws a lot more ifs into the Stadia game for sure than I was initially anticipating. On top of that,
True.
the other thing the Google Stadia CEO has claimed, which is kind of a brighter note for it, is it should only require speeds of 30 megabits per second, which isn't too terribly high in order to get that 60 FPS 4K resolution. So it seems like these ISPs are going to be the main restraining factor. Now, talking about the other factor that's kind of out of Stadia's control here to some extent is being able to get the backing of these other developers. Good news for them is apparently Square Enix is already in talks with them for getting Final Fantasy XIV to run on the Stadia platform, which is pretty big news if you ask me.
That's true. The thing that really struck me about this is that Square Enix approached them. See, Google wasn't
Yeah.
approaching them trying to be like, can you please support us? Square Enix walked up to them and said, we will support you with this.
And the other thing is, Squeenix makes a little bit of everything for everyone. Yeah, we know them for their
Mm-hmm.
JRPGs like Final Fantasy and a bunch of the various spin offs and other games inspired by it that they make. But they've also got things like Just Cause and Tomb Raider under their belts, which fall into entirely different genres, but are equally as successful in their own regard. Which means if you can get Squeenix backing you, there's nothing really stopping you from getting other companies as well, especially if Squeenix sees success.
That's true.
So, moving a little bit onto the Sony and Microsoft side of things here, now that it sounds like Stadia's got its problems, particularly with the whole ISP thing, but also seems to have some positives, so it's a very mixed bag on their perspective. Sony and Microsoft kind of have to respond to this. I mean, they're going with the old-fashioned system of hardware, it seems, to a large extent. I mean, Microsoft's starting to experiment with some hybrid things, that type of stuff. So let's talk about their responses. It seems to me, from what our rumors have circulated best, is Microsoft's biggest answer at this point is to put a lot more emphasis on things like Game Pass, which brings them closer to being able to be a little bit of a direct competitor to Stadia via something
Mm-hmm.
like Game Pass, and also offer multiple SKUs at the launch of their next generation console. We've heard talks about units both entitled the Scarlet and the Anaconda, which apparently does rather than don't, and both of those could theoretically be like a cheaper budget option of the console and then more of like a pro edition of the console, I guess, which I guess allows it to appeal to a broader audience because you offer that more optimized experience for your more hardcore gamers, but also a cheaper option for people who still want a home console. So that's one approach to it. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's definitely a plausible one because from what we've seen, the whole offering a pro version and then like a light version of a platform has been, on the rise for a while now. We've seen it with Sony and Microsoft, and perhaps later Nintendo. That's what all the rumors point to right now with the new Switch revisions. That
Right.
there's probably going to be two, a pro one and a light one.
Dude, I'm getting the
So
pro.
it
I'm just saying it right now. I'm getting the pro.
I'm probably right there with you. So yeah, if they want to continue pursuing the hardware route to sort of propagate the whole duality thing, it seems in their best interest, definitely. And I do think that you will appeal to a much broader demographic because you won't be like there's no compromise. You won't be pissing one side of the aisle off. You got the hardcore gamers, they're going to go for the pro thing, like we are, obviously.
Right.
And then you've got the more casual people who, if they still want to dive into that particular platform, there's still a portal to do that.
Exactly. And that makes some sense. Now, I feel like Sony, let's dive into that a little bit and then we'll talk about it kind of more broadly, if that's cool with
Mm,
you. I feel like Sony
sure.
actually, if all this backwards compatibility leak stuff, and they've also got one of their major developers whose name I'm blanking on at the moment from their company who's basically filed for all of these patents on the backwards compatibility thing. It seems like this is sort of his pet project of sorts. If they follow
Wow.
through with this properly, I think their response to Stadia is actually a lot stronger than Microsoft's in terms of going with like this hybrid offer budget options but also offer the Game Pass thing to sort of directly compete. That's sort of Microsoft's approach. I think Sony's is a lot stronger because if they master this backwards compatibility thing at launch, and this is with PlayStation 4 still getting a lot of major releases before the ends of its lifespan, i.e., there's the game
Mhm.
Concrete Genie, which looks amazing coming from first party Sony developers, The Last of Us 2, Borderlands 3, most likely, all those games still coming to the PlayStation 4 platform. Bearing that in mind, if PlayStation 5 is fully backwards compatible, we're talking about a library of over 6,200 games at launch, which is the largest of any console ever by a huge margin.
Sony, take my money.
Yeah, basically. And that's why I'm saying this is a better answer, because basically what you're saying to these other people is, yeah, you can go to Stadia. They're going to be fighting for the next 5 years probably to get developers behind their back, to get things really working, to get the kinks worked out, to get the ISP thing figured out, to make sure they can get that 30 megabits per second thing guaranteed, to get it throughout the world, and to get everything flowing
Mhm.
securely. Yeah, you can wait 5 years, watch a service grow and everything else. I mean, obviously, I'm kind of guessing with 5 years or whatever. Or you can go with us, get the PlayStation 5, and get 6,200 games day one, a huge number of which are revered as some of the best games of all time, and many of which, particularly of the PlayStation 4, PlayStation 3, and PlayStation 2 era right now, are ridiculously cheap. Do you realize the amount of that library you can get for $20 or less at the moment? And I'm talking
Hmm.
like AAA titles, not just like this minor stuff that's like an 8-hour playthrough. I'm talking like Final Fantasies, Mass Effects, Borderlands, all these games that you can spend hours upon hours upon.
So do you think we'll be seeing them be the ones to sort of appeal to physical buffs like us? Do you think that they will actually sort of throw out there as an advantage to their platform that like you'll still own the hardware and you'll still own the games with us?
I think that if they're going with this backwards compatibility thing, that's their best play. I mean, there's always the chance that they're going
It
to pull the
is.
same crap they did with the PlayStation 3's later half of the generation, where they were like, oh, it
Hmm.
plays PS2 games, you just gotta buy them in the PSN store. Well, that doesn't have half the games I
Gross.
want, and I don't get to own the disc, so I don't care. But
Hmm.
if they go with the physical release, fully embrace this backwards compatibility thing, I think they're going to see a lot of success because it will appeal to the physical buffs like us. And Sony's already got a really dedicated fan base right now with the
Hmm.
PlayStation 4 generation. And if you're offering to these PlayStation 4 users, hey, this console can play your PS4 games and everything before it, it's going to be very appealing to them. I mean, you and I are always in the market for something that's hardware compatible with older
Hmm.
systems because let's face it, it gets to be a pain having like 8 to 15 consoles hooked up at once, keeping track of all of those wires, making sure you aren't having too much voltage going through any single outlet, making sure you have your HDMI inputs all set up right and everything else. It's a pain in the neck. Rather than having,
Scart.
yeah, I know, right? And needing to re-equip your SCART cables for things, it's just awful. Versus being able to take down 4 of those consoles and just hook up the PlayStation 5, that would be insane.
I know.
Not to mention, a lot of
I'm
times
getting
when
giddy
these,
just thinking about it.
I know, right? And not to mention, a lot of these consoles that are backwards compatible make pretty drastic improvements to the original versions of the games when they're running them, when it's this first party type of stuff. I mean, for example, if you're
Hmm.
running Xbox 360 games on the Xbox One X, a lot of them are starting to become to the point where they'll upscale it to straight up 4K, not this like at like a native 4K resolution. It's absolutely insane to see. Or even running like 360 games on the Xbox One, they run a lot smoother than they initially did. Or running like PS2 games on an old Fat Station 3, they look really
Hey,
nice and they have that surround sound type of output you can get out of a PlayStation 3 and all those types of things. There's a lot of perks to this, not to mention I feel like generally speaking, our controllers have gotten better each generation, so you get that perk too.
that's true.
So I think Sony's got the overall better approach here. Now, what's going to be interesting is to see what Microsoft does in terms of their quote unquote backwards compatibility, which we always put that
Hmm.
in quotes because it's weird. You basically get a file to play the game rather than doing anything at all with the disc.
Boo.
In addition to that, it's also a very limited list of games it works with at the moment. I mean, if you're looking for like the main first party titles, 90% of them are there. But if you're more of a niche 360 fan, you're not going to be able to play a lot of those on the Xbox One. So I'm going to be curious to see if Microsoft works to expand this library as much as possible, or even goes for a native backwards compatibility thing. Because the problem with their current system is I would imagine they have to work with the original company in order to get ownership of these files to give access to people. Rather than if you have native backwards compatibility, then you're just reading it off the disk. You don't have to get access to a file to give to people.
Yeah, I don't think Microsoft's going to be pursuing the backwards compatibility route. We've already seen them try and beef up their Game Pass and other sorts of streaming things as much as possible. I think they're going to be taking that route that I proposed earlier, and they're just really going to try and hammer it home that they have exclusives and that they can stream them to you. I mean, they're already putting out the discless Xbox One coming out soon, so like they've already sort of abandoned that front. I don't
Right.
think we're going to see them try and be like Sony in their legacy and try and beef up their backwards compatibility and their game library. They're probably just going to focus on streaming, and that'll be how they're going to compete. They're going to compete directly with Stadia.
Right. And this is going to be, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out. Because if you ask me, Microsoft needs to be doing something a little bit more dramatic, particularly considering at this point in the current generation of consoles, they're getting their butts kicked around by Sony and Nintendo. Like earlier in the generation, they were doing a lot better before Switch launched, but now Switch sales and PlayStation 4 sales are absolutely destroying Xbox One sales. Which means
Mm-hmm.
to me, if you're Sony, you need to be thinking, okay, what are we doing wrong? I mean, I'm sorry, not Sony, Microsoft.
That's about to say.
I mean, they aren't. they aren't doing terrible. Like, they're still profitable and such. But if I were them, I'd be thinking, okay, we're theoretically the largest company of these three. Shouldn't we be winning, especially considering the 360, type of era we were the ones winning? Like, what happened? And they've had the same business approach of leaning into Game Pass and everything else for what, 2-3 years now?
Uh-huh.
And it just doesn't seem to be working for them. So my question to Microsoft is sort of, why?
What are you gonna do?
Yeah, I know.
HoloLens?
Yeah.
Hopefully.
We gonna see Xbox
Can-
VR?
Can you bring that bad boy out now?
Yeah.
Now's the time to do it.
Yeah, to turn things around, because, I mean, even just looking at the sales prices, an Xbox One S is by far the cheapest version of the consoles you can buy right now. You can find pre-owned Xbox One S's for like $150 or less in really good condition, versus like even a PS4 Slim would be like $240-ish at a good price. And those ones are like kind of crappy, to be honest with you, just because you run out of data so quick. But maybe that's just me. I prefer the 1 terabyte models, but still, regardless, my point holds that Microsoft, you're in a weird spot here because you're trying to basically wrestle the bear directly, which I don't know if that's the best answer for you at this point. Especially considering, if I were a business owner, let's get into this a little bit about how we would approach it. I would want to let Google figure out the kinks. Sort of, you're going all in. Your CEO has outright stated that you're against making a dedicated console platform. Let you guys work out the problems, sort it out, figure out what to do with this. I'm going to keep doing my thing that I know works, and I'm going to lay into it even more now that I know there's a competitor. Then once you figure out the kinks, maybe I'll hop on board after you've done 50% of the work for me to figure out how to optimize this.
No, I don't think Microsoft's going to be taking the exact same approach that Stadia is with the data centers and everything. But my thing is that they're probably going to become more and more of like a Roku-esque thing that you slap on the side of your TV.
Right.
And then like that's like your little piece of hardware, and you can download games from time to time and swap out ones you want, blah, 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 that stuff. My question is, though, what is Nintendo doing? / what will they do?
We're always in a weird place talking about them because, as we've said many times, for the past 2 to 3 generations, they've kind of fractured themselves off from being a direct competitor. It's kind of become a case of, rather than choosing a console, a lot of times you get an Xbox or a PlayStation, and then if you're gonna get another thing, it's the Nintendo console, or vice versa. You get the Nintendo console and then you get one of the other two. A, because the library of games is vastly different, and B, because Nintendo kind of stopped giving a crap about being a direct hardware competitor. They were more about creating this unique type of personality console, which is what the Switch, I think, is optimized really well. And the thing that we pointed out on several occasions now is the fact that the Switch, as it stands, I think is safe. Because let's face it, even Google Stadia running on a phone, your optimal form of data streaming via a data plan runs out at probably around like 30 gigabytes a month for most people before you get cut to the crappy data. At which rate, you're probably not running Stadia very well for a long time at all on that if you're anywhere but somewhere with a decent Wi-Fi connection. So with that being the case, on the go, the Switch is basically on its own right now and tearing it up if you're looking for a dedicated portable. On the other side of that, Nintendo does need to look towards the future. The Switch isn't going to last forever. Even with the Switch Pro coming out, currently Xbox and PlayStation are looking at creating something that has more than the 10.6 teraflops that Stadia is offering. The Switch doesn't come anywhere close to that, which means to be able to keep AAA developers interested, you're going to need a more powerful platform eventually.
So what do you think they'll do? Are they going to just have a Switch Pro, or are they going to release their own dedicated hardware, or...
I mean, honestly, that's kind of the question we have to ask ourselves. Nintendo, prior to a lot of what I've seen with Sony, I would have thought to be the single one that was kind of going for the lean into full hardware type of dedication type of thing. But Sony seems to be kind of taking a similar approach. I would be surprised if Nintendo ever goes back to a dedicated home console. I could see them just continuously upgrading the Switch. Like, we'll probably see a Switch Pro at some point. Eventually, maybe even a Switch 2 that's just stronger than this. Backwards compatible with all your Switch games, but then has all kinds of new power available, and then just kind of continuously upgrade it from there. Sort of like what we saw with the DS and Game Boy generations.
Hmm.
I feel like that would make the most sense to me from them because, as we've also talked about on several occasions, from a sheer networking standpoint, Nintendo has the fewest resources available to them to do streaming because they don't
Hmm.
have their hands in anything but the gaming market at the moment.
That's true. Yeah, I do think that that's probably their best approach is to be more like a Game Boy or DS with a Switch. Because I mean, yeah, there's no denying that those did very well their whole lifespans and everything.
Right, and the thing that they nailed with a lot of those is they were generally very backwards compatible too, at least with the
Hmm.
previous generation. And I think keeping that up would be great. Like, honestly, I think the optimal approach from Nintendo is keep upgrading the Switch just continuously for the next few years. And once you get to the point where it is like a clear cut new model of the Switch, like the Switch 2 or whatever, make it so the cartridge slot's basically the same. It just has a jack ton more power. So now you have Switch 2 games, but it still plays all your Switch games just fine too. Maybe it even upscales them or something like that. And then just keep doing it. And the reason I think Nintendo can also find success here is I feel like generally speaking, Nintendo fans are more commonly physical buffs to begin with, just because a lot of times if you're a classic like vintage gamer so to speak, you probably have a pretty good appreciation for Nintendo just because their legacy is so strong.
That's true. I do. Although one thing that does jump out at me is that what a lot of people are doing with the Nintendo Switch is that they are actually trying to shoot for that being an all digital platform. They're getting the largest SD cards they can find and just shoving all their games onto that.
Some of that I think also has to do with the fact that the Switch is kind of an indie developer's like basically dream at the moment, and most of those
That's
indie
true.
developers don't ever see physical releases. So those like large SD cards, I think in some cases are more so meant for that. But you're right, some people like their portables to be all digital platforms because part of the case is convenience. At which rate, carrying around a ton of dedicated memory cards can be a pain after a while. And so
Hmm.
we'll see there. It could be an all digital platform. Even at that point, I don't think I really see them switching to a streaming platform. And if
Well,
the
we did mention earlier that there was, every platform now has sort of the duality. There's like the light version and the pro version. Perhaps we'll see that the light version doesn't have a cartridge slot, but the
right,
pro version does.
right, and we do have rumors about different Switch models coming out this year or like next year, next couple years, something like that. That's definitely a
Hmm.
possibility because it does save the company some money. Now, would I get
That's
that
true.
version? Heck no. But I do think it's definitely a possibility for them to go that route. Now, here's kind of a question for Nintendo's future I think we failed to address. If the market does evolve into pure streaming, do you see that being the point that they've kind of hinted at from time to time over the past couple years where they just become a third party developer?
I definitely don't think right away. Nintendo will not fall to that without a fight, definitely. They'll still try to produce their own hardware. Like you said, perhaps the whole streaming ep- epidemic will come sooner than we think, and Nintendo will be the last ones with any sort of hardware. Just upgrading the Switch more and more because we haven't really seen anything like the Switch before as this sort of hybrid, ultra powerful portable platform. We definitely haven't seen any of the other platform holders dive into this. So I think Nintendo's relatively safe in that regard right now. I don't think that they'll fall anytime soon to being a strictly third party developer. And like you said, they have no networking infrastructure to try and become anything close to what Stadia is, or even anything close to what Microsoft has right now.
Right. So this kind of brings up my other point. If we do see basically a general switch to this pure streaming service type of an atmosphere, do you think it's possible that Nintendo kind of continues a similar to position to where they are now, where they almost exist in a separate hemisphere of the market, where they're continuing to produce successful hardware on some level? Do you think it's possible we see everybody else switch to digital, but Nintendo's still going pretty strong because they're the only ones offering that hardware option?
Yes, that's sort of what I was pointing to earlier. They're probably
Gotcha.
going to be the last ones that are out there because they're the ones who have this thing, this being the Switch that isn't like anything else we've seen before. And I definitely think that they will be able to survive with that for a long time if, like you said, they keep upgrading it and making sure it's beefy enough to handle what's being thrown at it. And I do definitely think that Nintendo is most comfortable in this part of the market where it's sort of not a direct competitor to the other two platforms. It's just doing its own thing. It's being Nintendo, and all the fans love it.
Yeah, they've kind of secured their own niche here, which I think is really interesting and serves them pretty well, like you pointed out. Now, the next kind of question on the list, because we're just going to keep discussing this as thoroughly as we can, because there are a lot of rumors that have circulated for a while about Sony trying to compete with the Switch on some level. And I think the reason people talk about Sony rather than Microsoft, Microsoft's never really shown any interest in entering the portable market. And Sony,
Hmm.
if they paid any attention to the market, even though the Vita wasn't super commercially successful, a lot of that was probably their own marketing, because most of the people who ended up buying a Vita and actually like genuinely trying it fell in absolute love with the console because it just took some effort to find the games that were good because they weren't marketed well. But once you did, you realized it was a really good platform. So Sony's established themselves as being capable of producing these strong portable consoles. And so this kind of brings us back to the rumor. A lot of people have wondered if Sony will put out a competitor to the Switch. Do you think that might be an answer for them moving forward? Trying to do something similar to Nintendo, trying to beat them at their own game.
I do think, like you said, it is somewhat probable, and it is intriguing to me because I love Sony's older portable platforms. Like looking at the PSP, I can't believe that thing was released in 2004 with how well it's held up today. Because I still pull mine out and play it all the time, and it looks like it came out last year.
Yeah,
Like Sony, the way they sort of almost over-engineer their platforms is baffling, and it usually works for people like me and people like us because we keep that sort of stuff around. And if they were to release a competitor to the Switch, I would definitely be hyped to see it. I would definitely be hyped to see what it looks like. But are they going to? Uh, I don't know. It's a tough one because they'd sort of have to play the same game Nintendo did. They'd really they'd really almost have to abandon what they've set up with the PlayStation. I don't see them being able to market both at the same time the same way Nintendo did because Nintendo didn't have to support another dedicated home platform. Nintendo dropped the Wii U almost immediately and then set up on the Switch. So if Sony were to sort of embrace a hybrid system like that, I don't know how they'd really pull that off. I'm not saying that they won't. I'm not saying that they shouldn't. I just like that just be baffling, really. But I would like to see them enter the portable market again. But I also don't think the portable market is as lucrative as it once was with like what we said, the cell phones and mobile gaming, all that sort of stuff. And Nintendo pretty much has filled the niche that there is for portable gaming because you can already play most of these AAA titles like Skyrim and Doom 2016, Wolfenstein, all that sort of stuff on the go with a Switch. So I'm not exactly sure what other niche Sony would fill with a portable platform of their own.
that's true. And I think you make a lot of good points there. And one thing I really want to touch on, and you started to get at this too, is the fact that Sony has a tendency to over engineer their hardware. And if we look at the
Mm-hmm.
portables that they did make, I love Nintendo's
Yeah,
portables. Don't get me wrong here. But there's a certain sense of premium that you get when you're
exactly.
playing on the Sony ones. Like even playing on my PSP as opposed to a new 2DS XL, the PSP made in 2004 versus the new 2DS XL which debuted in I want to say 2016ish still feels far more premium. I can put
Mm-hmm.
music on there. I can watch movies on that.
Yeah.
And I can play games that honestly, in terms of size and scale, can basically keep up with the new 2DS XL on a really good looking
Mm-hmm.
screen and on something that played discs on the go. Yeah, UMDs are pieces of crap. We all get it. But they're cool pieces of crap. And there's something kind of neat about knowing I'm playing this on a frickin' train, spinning a disc in something in the palm of my hands. That's kind of awesome if you think about it.
And look at the Vita. They launched that thing with 3G GPS capability shoved inside of it. It had an OLED display back when that was barely even a thing. Like, the portables they put out are amazing.
Yeah,
So I would definitely like to see another one. But like I said, I don't know if they would do it. I don't know if they should do it. I don't even know if they could do it.
yeah.
We don't know.
I mean, even pressing forward with the Vita a little bit, Being a Vita owner myself, one thing that kind of like shocked me for a second is I realized, wait a second, this is compatible with Bluetooth headphones. Like that's really cool. It seems small and minute, but you have to keep in mind this came out in 2011, and it was a game system that worked with Bluetooth headphones inherently. That's absolutely incredible. You had
Yeah, the
apps
Switch
like
doesn't even do that.
I know. Then you had apps like freaking Facebook and crap on there that went on for a really long time. You had something that was the equivalent of the Street Pass service that worked on there for a long time. You had online play through the system that was basically the equivalent of like COD online multiplayer for a portable and everything else. They just go above and beyond for these things.
Hmm.
And one thing that's kind of been rolling through my mind here is Sony's shown no signs of stopping with the success of the PlayStation 4 despite us approaching the end of the console generation. If anything, the sales seem to keep growing and going up, even with the Switch's massive success as being a pseudo competitor there. So I guess my question is, Sony, if you've got this massively successful PlayStation 4 and you've got this enormous back catalog of over 6,200 games, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility for you to make some sort of a portable that's sort of like the Switch. That's basically the ultimate version of your PlayStation 4 that's released at a similar time to the PlayStation 5. Only this plays PlayStation 4 games, PlayStation 3, PlayStation 2, and PlayStation 1, but it's also a portable console. Then you have your PlayStation 5 games, which does all that. I'm sorry, your PlayStation 5 system, which does all that in addition to the PlayStation 5 games.
That is terrifying, and I would love to see.
Like, I think that could be their answer. I mean, let's face the facts here. If you've seen a PlayStation 4 Slim, that thing is pretty freaking small, and that can handle the PlayStation 3 game. I'm sorry, PlayStation 4 games. Which means I'm sure with Sony's knowledge and optimization of either emulators or genuine hardware, hopefully the latter, but you know, they could probably get it to run PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 1 games pretty darn easily. The way technology's been advancing, the PS4 Slim came out several years ago. They could continue to optimize and shrink that to the point where you could probably get a screen running on it and some controllers and such pretty freaking easily. And that'd be a 6,200 game library that people would probably buy into pretty well. Yeah, you've got remote play going on right now, but once more, do I have the data to support that with any kind of longevity? No, not really. It would be a really cool concept to see them execute that I feel like wouldn't cost them a ton of money in development.
Yeah, it's one of the things that if anyone were to pursue something like that, it would be Sony. Seeing as how they almost over-engineer almost all their hardware, I could see them trying something like this. They are the most likely one to do something like that.
Yeah, and the other thing that we've seen traditionally with Sony consoles is most of them don't like to die. Like, I want you to take a second to absorb the fact that the last game released for the PlayStation 2 came out in 2014. The PlayStation 2 was supposedly dead in 2006. The last game for the PlayStation 3 that was an official release, I'm pretty sure was Persona 5, which came out in 2016, when the PlayStation 4 launched in 2013. These systems don't like to die, period. And I kind of doubt the PlayStation 4 is going to be any different, which means a portable like this that can continue to get a couple new releases here and there for a while, in addition to a library that people adore and would love to have access to on the go, I think could actually be a serious moneymaker for them. And let's face it, if they get something that can run full PlayStation 4 games, that's more powerful than the Switch. Those games are generally larger than anything I've seen on the Switch.
That's definitely true. And like I said, terrifying. And I would love to see it.
Dude, I'd be the first in line to buy it. And I think, as we were discussing before, this idea of Sony maybe trying to take on that image of being the representative for people who are physical buffs, that could play into that a little bit more for people. And I think it would be really awesome. I mean, I don't know. It's a crazy concept, but we have seen, I think, from time to time, a lot of rumors about Sony trying to do something to keep up with the Switch. And a lot of fans have asked them, you know, what's the successor to the Vita? What's this? What's that? What are you going to do to answer this? And maybe Sony will hear their outcries. I mean, once more, I feel like if they've been paying any attention, most of the consensus I've seen is the only reason the Vita failed was its marketing. And Sony was, like, they liked having the PSP in the market, so I wouldn't say it's entirely nuts to say maybe they'll dive back in at some point. And I think they would be the ones to do it. I mean, the question we have to ask ourselves is, what does that mean for Nintendo? But of course, we'd have to wait and see.
Yep,
Because Sony's,
definitely think you hit the nail on the head there.
yeah, because like Sony, they've been kind of just flexing on everybody as much as possible. And as much as I hate it when people do that, they've had pretty good reason for doing it in recent
Hmm.
times. I mean, let's face it, they've been a good company to get behind. If you're a Sony fan, you've been in a good status of things for these past few years. So, honestly, moving forward, let's take a second and rank where we think the companies basically lie in terms of competing with Stadia, now that we've talked about things thoroughly. I think, personally, I would put Microsoft at the bottom for being a competitor, just because I think their approach is a little too direct to facing Stadia at the moment. Because in terms of the sheer resource, the type of resources required to do something like Stadia, I think for the time being, Google outpaces them a little bit. Thoughts on that?
Hmm. But exclusives.
That's true, but Microsoft's exclusives have been slimming a lot
But
in recent years.
exclusives.
But I can play Halo on my PC. Like,
Can you?
well,
Actually,
they're getting ready to
no.
release the Master Chief Collection, so I don't think you can play Halo 5 on it yet, but you can play the Master Chief Collection soonish.
Okay, what about Forza?
That, but that's only Forza. I mean, Forza's cool. Don't get me wrong, but
I'm just pulling like because I could just see Microsoft being like that.
yeah. But what about Forza? What about any other
Yeah.
games? Forza
We
Horizon.
have Master Chief.
And we also have Gears of War, even though the last one flopped, or didn't flop, but wasn't super well received. Still,
I only played a Gears of War game once, and I did not care for it.
they're good. They're decent for multiplayer and such, but you know.
Eh.
Anyway, so that's why I kind of put Microsoft on the bottom. Do you kind of agree with me there? Like,
Do I agree? Actually, no, I don't, because a lot of people really do buy into this whole Game Pass stuff, and it's been working very well for Microsoft so far. I know you said that Sony and Nintendo have outpaced them, and this is true, but Microsoft does seem to have found a footing somewhat in this area.
that's true. Where would you put Microsoft amongst the three?
Uh, Microsoft definitely sort of has the clearest plan we've seen. Like we've speculated a lot, obviously, and we could probably go on all day about what Sony and Nintendo will do. Microsoft has the clearest plan right now. They have infrastructure to pull some of this off. They have people ingrained in the sort of mindset of the Game Pass and Xbox Live Gold and such. They have a good base to do what we've speculated that they're going to do. I don't think they're going to flop entirely with this because they do have their fans, just like you said, Sony does. Well, so does Microsoft, and
True.
they're going to stick by them in that way. So I definitely don't think they're going to be the worst ones off, especially because of their clear-cut plan. Though, like you said, I don't think I would put them at first. I'd put them at around second.
Okay. Who do you put at the bottom?
That's a good question. Because it's hard to rank these things because each platform, minus Sony and Microsoft, is so different. We have Nintendo appealing to Nintendo fans and people who want something on the go, more casual people. We have Sony and Microsoft doing their thing with the hardcore people, and then we have Stadia, which is it even a platform if you don't
Yeah.
know it? But it basically is. So it's really hard to rank these in a linear way, especially because we don't really know how they're all going to react. Like I said, I do think there is some mantra behind Sony putting out a PS5 legacy. That is probably the route they're going to go. I don't think Nintendo would be the last. I mean, if I have to put someone in last, it's going to be Sony.
I got you. I respect that. I was actually going to put them first if they pull off this backwards compatibility thing because
But
company.
we see that appeals to us, but clearly that doesn't appeal to everyone because we've seen the PS4 flying off the shelf, Sony flexing on everyone, but does the PS4 have any sort of backwards compatibility that's viable? No.
That's true, but the one thing I kind of want to get at there is that brand loyalty is a thing, and Sony's developed a lot of that this generation. So I think a lot of those fans will carry over with PlayStation 5, and if they offer this backwards compat, they could win a lot more people over who haven't been won over already. So I don't think it would necessarily see any of their fan base shrink a whole ton, only have the potential to grow.
That's true.
So I actually kind of rank them at the top, but it really depends on whether they pull off this backwards compatibility thing.
Exactly.
Well.
Because this has basically, earth-shattered all of our preconceived notions about anything we could relate to the console wars.
Right.
Because Stadia doesn't even have hardware, technically. So, right. Yeah, it's really interesting, and I do think Nintendo has somewhere to go from what they've done with the Switch.
Yeah.
So I would put them, obviously, because there's only one place left, I'd put them second, because Nintendo has always found a way to survive. They've always had fans loyal enough to support whatever ventures they go off on doing, whatever gimmick they want to highlight, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah.
I got you. I put them in second place as well, and I kind of put Sony at the top. Speaking of this list, be sure to let us know in the comments section down below where you guys rank these companies being prepared to deal with Stadia. So with all that being said, I think I've kind of gotten everything off my plate I want to hit on without rambling all day. How about you?
The apocalypse is great.
That's true.
I haven't been eaten by a robot yet.
Not yet. We'll give it a little more time. So let's go ahead and delve into our final segment, try and brighten the spirits here a little bit with What Are We Playing? How about you, Logan?
Castlevania Bloodlines.
That's a thing.
On the Sega Genesis.
How is that?
Good music.
Yeah, I mean, it's Castlevania.
Good music. Very hard. Very, very, very hard. Yeah.
Sounds like a classic.
Good old Konami.
Yeah. But, you know, Genesis is a good system. Are you playing on an analog Mega SG?
No.
You're using your
I'm playing it backwards compatibly through my 32X.
Ah, there you go. There you go.
Yep.
As for me, I've been playing Wipeout the Omega Collection. That thing is really good. It's got 3 Wipeout games in 4K. It's PlayStation VR compatible.
Awesome.
It's very fast. Basically, if you like F-Zero with a little Mario Kart mixed in, you'll like this game. It's really cool. Got some nice like EDM and drum and bass beats in there as well. Very fun game. Very, very fun game.
Yeah, I've played the Wipeout games since around the PS1 era.
Yeah,
they're really cool.
They're a blast to play. We'll have to play it together sometime, maybe for some sort of an LP or something for the future. But yeah, I picked up a massive amount of PS4 games this week, so I was mainly installing those, and I'm trying not to dive into any of them because I'm super behind on some game reviews I want to take care of, and so I was like, all right, Wipeout's a more casual game. I'll just play some of that in the meantime. But that seems really good for playing stuff, and obviously trucking along in Persona 4 slowly but surely. Eventually we'll get there.
Yep.
Eventually we'll get there. That game's
I did escape the Seebeck building in Persona 1.
Hey, there you go.
Very proud of myself. I got out of that labyrinth.
You should be proud. You should be proud.
God, if that game features an actual labyrinth, I'm gonna be screwed.
just turns left infinitely. Eventually you'll get out, right? Eventually.
I guess that's how they work.
Yeah. And speaking of one of the games that got released this week, Legend of Heroes, Trails of Cold Steel, Definitive Edition, Collector's Edition, whatever the crap you want to call it, go pick it up. It's a cool JRPG. I've yet to play it, but I've seen it, and it looks so good, and the Steelbook alone is worth the $50 you pay. It also comes with a soundtrack and an official piece of in-game currency physical, so it's like the coins they use in-game, but you have a physical coin of it, which is really awesome. The second game is coming out in May-ish for the PS4, and the third game comes out later this year. Gotta get in my JRPG propaganda for the episode. Anything else you want to say before we conclude, Logan?
Guess I'm gonna have to go buy some more JRPGs.
Yeah, JRPGs. That's gonna wrap it up for this week, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and if you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe. Don't get a what?
Don't get
eaten by the robot apocalypse. And we'll catch you next time with some more New Bark News podcast.